Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind, episode 104.
If you don't know about a thing, it's easy to be afraid of it. If you don't know about a thing and it's a mystery to you, it's easy to look at it as something, grim or dark, and it's easy to be misinformed about it.
Benjamin Franklin once said, "Do not curse the darkness, rather light a candle instead." If you're ready to set your mind on fire, then prepare yourself for the Luminous Mind with your host, Rebecca Bowman.
Today's fire starter is Stephen Horwich. Stephen has been a professional educator for over 40 years. He has taught in the Master's Writing Program for the University of Southern California, for Los Angeles Unified School District, and in private schools for over 10 years. He then gave up on traditional education and homeschooled his 2 children. Now, as a homeschool advocate, he has authored Connect the Thoughts, which is a comprehensive homeschool curriculum for students ages 5 through high school. He is also an Emmy Award-winning author of musicals, plays, and screenwrites with many credits. Welcome, Stephen. Start into the topic we're going to delve into.
We were going to talk about the best way to teach different subjects: history, science, math, my least favorite subject. But yeah, we were going to discuss some of the things that an educator or a homeschool parent might look at when they're putting together their kids' studies or or what to look for in outside curriculum when they go looking, for what the best approach is going to be. I'd like to get into kind of what to look for and how curriculum is built and how you can best educate a child in these subjects. I think that would be valuable. And, we can keep it on the up.
We don't
have to go beating teachers over the head this time or blowing up schools or anything like that.
All right. And we kind of talked about preschool, too, and the age you would start.
My own feeling is that up until age 5 or through their 5th year or around that period of time, that really what you want to be doing with a child in terms of their education is reading a lot to them. Just doing a ton of reading to them, teaching them a little bit of reading, teaching them to read a clock, teaching them to recognize some basic numbers, teaching them their phone number, teaching them their home address, making sure they know how to get home from wherever they might be or know how to ask for help. There's a skill set that a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old can acquire that is very useful to them, but does not necessarily contribute to their schooling later, their education. And one of the things we can talk about when we get into this also is what to do with kids who are a handful, really problematic. A lot of people who homeschool have kids at home because the school could not handle their children. Their children were not doing well in school for various reasons, behavioral, remedial, quote unquote, that kind of thing. So I think as we talk about how to teach these various subjects, how to approach them with different age groups, I'd like to kind of get into that too. But with really young kids like you're talking about, I wouldn't teach a whole lot of history or science or math or any of that stuff because they're kids. They should have the pleasure and the privilege of enjoying their childhood. They should be playing and experiencing themselves in the world around them. That's plenty of education. If you're reading to your children every night, as I used to do every night for many years, read to my kids. We'd pick out books together and we'd read. And then after a while, I had them read to me, which was a way for them to start to developing reading skills where I would read a sentence and then they would read it back to me, looking at it and that kind of thing, which is whole word identification. It's another way to teach reading outside of phonics, which I don't think works all the time. But if you're reading all the time and your kids are experiencing a lot of things and, teaching them how to count to 10 and they can read a clock and they know their phone number and their address, you've done pretty well. up to age 5, I think that's fine. Around age 5, I would begin some sort of structured education, but I'd limit it to 2 to 3 hours a day at the most, 5 days a week at the most. I'd give them protracted breaks from quote-unquote school, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever the family can endure, right? Because it's tough to not have your kids learning once you've started that process. But these are still very young children, and I feel very strongly that in denying them the time and the freedom to experience their youth, you're denying them a very important aspect of who they are. So I think serious education, truly can begin at around age 7. I know that in my own curriculum, the curriculum we have called starter curriculum for ages 5 and 6 and for pre-literate students, it is educative. It does deal with science and history and even creative writing, though we're dealing with pre-literate students who can't read or write. You can teach them creative writing because you're teaching them how to create, and they don't have to write it down necessarily. But some
kids that age love to draw pictures,
You bet. Yeah. And that's a big part of what we do, too. We ask kids to draw ideas that they have and draw their understanding of science and history at different times in their studies so that they get to experience that part of their creativity as well. But yeah, you're right. I don't think at that age science and history and math are very important, and I don't think they should be. I also think there are a lot of parents out there who are a little bit misguided about the idea that they must start their children's education early and they must get them ready for Harvard at age 5 and, sign them up for that fantastic college school by the time they're 7 years old and all that kind of nonsense. It is utter nonsense and ruinous to a child's life. So, to put that kind of pressure on a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 10-year-old is very silly and destructive. And
yeah.
I really have problems with it when I run into parents who do that kind of thing.
Well, and I kind of wonder if that's why our education, if we continuing to fall, is because we've bored those children at such a young age that they have no desire to learn. And so sometimes keeping the play aspect going at least keeps their imagination flowing. And, they do learn a lot just on their own, in their own scientific, ways that they handle stuff.
I think kids have an amazing capacity at an early age to learn, and that it doesn't need to be formalized. It doesn't have to be structured. For a lot of kids, structure and formalization of education at age 5 or 6 or 7 or something like that is too much, and they feel the restriction of their freedoms. And they are, fenced in as far as what they're experiencing and, unfortunately, what they can learn. So it isn't a very good idea. But I do think that by around age 7, your child should begin to read. There should be some serious reading skills being developed. And that includes vocabulary. Now, most schools, this is one of my pet peeves with institutional education. I'm sure if you went to public school, and even most private schools, you remember receiving spelling lists. Every grade, every week, you got a list of words you were supposed to learn how to spell. It's a mystery to me as a professional educator for over 40 years. I am absolutely mystified that somebody sat down and figured out that in the 8th week of 1st grade, a kid should know what these particular words are and how to spell it. It's such nonsense. And it's a horrible way to teach spelling because it's arbitrary. Those are not words that the child is interested in. Those are not words that the child has attempted to use. Those are not words that are even real to the child. Additionally, to give a kid a spelling list, see, now we're talking about spelling as a subject and how to teach it, which is what you and I were going to do. So here we are. We've arrived. If you're going to give a kid a spelling list, it should be constructed kind of as follows. I think what you should do is you allow the child to do whatever studies he's doing that week. And as he writes essays or he writes creative writing stories or he reads things that interest him and he runs into words that he doesn't fully understand, or more importantly, that he doesn't spell correctly in his own essays and stories, you make a list. You don't correct them while he's working. You don't correct his creative writing as far as spelling goes. You just put the words that are misspelled on a list, which you'll pull out at the end of the week or at the beginning of the next week. But you never correct a kid's spelling in terms of his essays or his syntax, by the way, his sentence construction. Leave it alone. This stuff will improve as he gets older and does more of it, and he does a lot of reading, but it will also improve if you take this approach. Just leave that stuff alone and admire the work the child is doing and make a list of words that are misspelled. Those are words that child tried to use and did not spell correctly. Then what you do is you pull out that list, you make sure that the child understands the definitions for each of those words, because learning to spell a word without a definition for the word is completely useless to the child. He'll never be able to make use of it in his life.
Well, and once they understand that, a word, then it does lock it into their brain, in a different perspective. So,
yeah, and very often when you understand a word, you understand how it's spelled.
Yeah.
That also starts to make sense when you understand a word. So it's very important that you get the definitions of the word and that the child be able to use them in a couple sentences and that he can think with that word. Then you give him the list of the spelling words, and there shouldn't be a big, long list. Narrow it down. 7, 8, 9 words in a week is more than enough of words that he tried to use but did not spell correctly, because those are words he's interested in. Those are words he's trying to make use of. Now you're giving him a list of words to spell that he created out of his work, and he's much more likely to take an interest in spelling because those are words he's interested in already. So I really recommend that as an approach to spelling, and I really recommend very strongly, Mom and Dad, get your hands off of correcting spelling. Get your hands off of correcting spelling in essays and writing and anything else that the student is doing. Stay away from that. Just make the list, and then treat that as a separate subject, spelling.
Well, and pulling it out, do you think it creates, like you said, you're not critiquing the work then. You're just pulling out a list of words that he struggled with. And
Right.
Okay.
Exactly right. And it's a list of words he not only struggled with, but he wants to use because he tried to use them. So the interest is already there. But yeah, absolutely right. It allows you to avoid critique. Correcting spelling and correcting sentence structure is a form of critique, especially for an 8-year-old who doesn't care about that kind of stuff. He's just trying to write a creative writing story that's fun and that interests him and that fulfills an assignment. Or he's trying to write an essay about history or something about science that fulfills a requirement and that will interest him in the way he's writing it. Well, you can kill a kid's interest so fast by just doing minutia like that, correcting spelling, correcting his words. That's how you murder a child's reach for his education, with little things like that, especially when you do it hundreds of times. So I really recommend separating out spelling as a subject. Also, the same thing goes for reading. I recommend very strongly separating out reading as a subject. When a child is learning to read and developing literacy, to then critique their reading in history and their reading in science is to make them really not want to read. You have to make it inviting to them. They have to want to do it if they're going to do it well. And there is no skill in education more important than reading. None. Literacy is absolutely the top skill required. Without literacy, a student can learn nothing. And if a student is literate, he can learn anything.
And I've learned if you're having children read things they're not really interested in, they're not going to retain it, anyway, regardless of how many questions you ask them.
Yep, that's exactly right, which is why reading should be treated as a separate subject. I think that you should allow children to select their own reading. I think that you should take a lot of trips to the library. I think you should let your children really get to know what's available out there in the way of literature that's appropriate for their age. And then I have my own technique for these things. One thing that I suggest is that the parent get two copies of any book that the child is really interested in reading or has read once and wants to read again. When they express that interest, go out and secure 2 copies of it. 1 copy you'll need to own so that you can give it to your child. You hand it to him and you say, this is yours forever. And in that way, the child develops a library of books that interest him. And he's far more likely to go back into that library and read those things again over the next year or two. So
plus you avoid library fines that way.
And you know what? In the long run, books aren't that expensive anymore. And you don't have to buy $25 books, but you can also get them out of the library. If you buy one copy and get the second copy out of the library, that's fine. It's a little bit of work, but there's a reason you should do it this way. So you give the child his own copy and you say, this is yours. It goes into your library. You own it. If you want to burn it, if you want to draw on it, if you want to use it to make paper airplanes, that's your business. It's your book. And then you have your copy and you both open to the same page. And you read to him the first sentence on the first page. Then you have him read it back to you, pointing at the words, just as you should do for him. Then read it back to him if he didn't do it, terrifically well, pointing at the words as you go, and have him do it again, back to you. And this is whole word identification, or a way to do whole word identification. And it's very effective at getting a child interested in that book in his hand, especially as he now knows he owns that book and it's his. And it's a really good way to give him ownership of his literacy. He's reading out of his copy. He's not borrowing yours. It's his. He owns it, just as we want him to own his literacy. So it's a good way to teach reading. I recommend it, especially at a younger age. I know for me, when I was 9 and 10 and 11 and 12 into my teens, my grandmother used to take me shopping for books every weekend. I still have a massive library. I have several thousand books at least, and many, many, many of them were bought at that time by my grandparents. That was their way of encouraging me to read, and because they did that, I'm a writer, I'm a teacher, I'm many things because they bought me a lot of books. I remember a couple years ago, I wrote a musical version of A Tale of Two Cities, and I was it's more than a couple years ago, it was about 15 years ago, and I was in England having it produced, so I was there with my musical. And my grandmother passed away while I was in England, so I couldn't get back. We were in the middle of getting ready for opening night, which was just coming up in a day or two. But I wrote a letter which my mom read at the ceremony. And what it said was, I'm in England, and I'm doing this musical because my grandmother bought me A Tale of Two Cities at the age of 9.
Wow.
It is a life changer to have your own library. I can't stress it hard enough. If you want your children to seriously get interested in reading, provide them their own library. Let them know it's theirs and they own it. And if they draw on the books, friends, that's their business. That it really truly is their business. But if they have a library, after a while, owning that will also extend into their literacy, and they'll start to own that as well. It is a very important thing.
Well, it's funny having I have 4 kids, and I do go buy all their books if they're studying a certain book. Like I said, I avoid library fines that way because then they can study it at their own pace. I don't have to keep renewing or anything like that. But it is funny, my kids having so many, I try to put them on a common bookshelf, and I always find them in their room, on their bookshelves.
Mm-hmm, that's right. Yeah, that's right. And I think that's absolutely right. That's an effort on each of your children's part to own the things that interest them, which we want our kids to do. We want them to be interested in life and in their education and to own it. And, here's this outward symbol of education, a book, which is certainly the symbol for education, right? A book.
Yeah.
And your kids want their own books, and they should want their own books. It means you've done a good job of instilling an interest in literacy. So anyway, now we've discussed spelling and reading. So let's get into different subjects. Let's start with history, which I love talking about. I'd like to just look at the best way to teach history. And in looking at the best way to teach history, I want to talk about the worst way to teach history, which is how public schools do it. Here's what public schools do when they teach history. They take a kind of scattershot approach to history. In your second grade, you're going to study Napoleon and Roman emperors and the history of the space program. And in the third grade, you're going to study the American Revolution and cavemen and something else. It's arbitrary. There's absolutely no structure to it. And the problem with that approach, one of the many problems to that approach, is that a student, no matter how old they are, taking that approach never learns where everything falls on the timeline. They never understand the sequence of things. And the most important thing that history has to teach them gets lost, which is that history is the living, breathing example of cause and effect. Something happens in history, and because of that, 10 other things happen in the next 100 years. And because those 10 things happen, 100 other things happen in the next 100 years. That's how history works. That's the actuality of history.
Yeah, I remember being super confused all the time, and I didn't know where anything was taking place. That wasn't confusing to me.
That's really a problem, not to teach geography in conjunction with history. But it's also a problem not to teach history on the timeline. You have to do both of those things. So when I teach history in all my history courses, what we do is we start out the lesson plan with the student locating on a map, globe, or the internet the different places that are going to be discussed in that lesson plan. That's the very first thing we do, so that they will know before they study that lesson plan where these things took place, exactly the thing you were complaining about. The second thing we do is we define all of the unusual or particular or difficult words that they're about to encounter in their studies, so that then they'll be able to understand the materials when they read them. And then they read the materials. And in history, the way I teach history, except at one level of my curriculum, the way I teach history is on the timeline. We start at the beginning and we move towards present time, and we take steady, regular steps. What's more, I believe history should be taught the way Will Durant said it should be taught. Will Durant was America's greatest historian, Will and Ariel Durant, his wife. They were absolutely the finest historians and amongst our best philosophers, and their understanding of history is mind-boggling. But he said, listen, history, it should be integrated. He said the mistake we make in teaching history is that we separate it out into 10 different subjects. Here's the history of economics. We're going to teach economic theory. Here's the history of politics. And now we're going to teach how, kingdoms progressed into democracies and communist states and blah, 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 right? And his feeling was that history should be integrated, that you should stay on the timeline and you should learn everything about what was happening at that time, because politics and economics and the daily life of the people and geography and
I loved looking at the art that, was popular at that time.
Right. And Will Durant covers that extensively in his histories. Art is a big part of what he does. You're supposed to know about that period. You should know all of these different aspects of it, because added up, it's a thing we call life. And that's what history is all about, is living things and how we got to be the way we are and where are we going now because we are the way we are. I think if you stay on the timeline and you're thorough and you don't separate out subjects in history, we're going to cover historic clothing. We're going to just teach it in an integrated manner so that the child studying the Renaissance doesn't just study the art of the Renaissance, as spectacular as it is, but also the daily lives and the food and the clothes and the politics and the economics and the geography and the way people traveled in the Renaissance. When he comes out of that, he's going to understand that period, and he's going to understand how that period contributes to us today, what that period of time contributes to his life right now, because it always does.
Well, and if you study American history, if you don't go back and study some of those ancient civilizations like our founders did, you have no idea why they set up the government like they did.
Well, heavens, we don't want children actually educated like the founders of the country were educated. They were all homeschooled. We don't want that. They were almost all of them invariably homeschooled. And yes, they took a profound interest in history, one for one.
Yeah.
Really studied it. And they studied the literature of their time and the literature of the 100 years prior to that. They were reading Locke and men like that, which led us to the American Revolution. So Yeah, no, we don't want that. We don't want kids actually educated. No, we don't want that. So with history, what I hope parents will consider when they're teaching history is a long game, not a short game. What am I going to teach this semester? What am I going to teach him this week? What should I have him look at this week? I hate copy work and I hate unit studies. I hate them, because they're murdering education as a rule of thumb. There are some exceptions, but getting a unit study on great gunfighters of the American West does not have the student learning any context. What about the American West? Gunfighters were one small aspect of the American West, and the American West was one small aspect of an America that was expanding from sea to shining sea at that time. And you really need to understand the whole picture to understand the violence of the American West. So
I think children naturally do their own unit studies, because I've noticed as my kids do study history, like you said, kind of on that timeline, that they'll pull out things that are really interesting to them and really go in depth.
Yep, that's perfect. That's exactly what you want. If you're allowing a child to be exposed to history in sequence and you're being thorough, you will absolutely hit moments in time and moments in history where your children will light up like Christmas trees, and you will have found something they're interested in, and they will want to know more. And at that point, you expand upon the materials. One of the things I've found, it's very curious, and I honestly don't understand it. It's an interesting phenomenon to me. Kids, almost one for one in my experience teaching history through the curriculum and stuff like that, they're really interested in ancient Egypt. Now, why? I don't know. It is a very interesting part of history, but I find kids get to that and they eat it up.
Yeah, every one of my kids have kind of had to pause there.
Yeah,
they want to watch documentaries, and it's the mummies or something. I don't know.
That's right. And there's tons of material out there, wonderful material on ancient Egypt. In fact, on Netflix right now, there is a series that they got from PBS called Egypt. It's actually 6 movies, each 1 hour long, but it's 3 movies broken into 6 movies. It's 3 movies, each 2 hours long is what it really is. And each one is about a famous European who went into Egypt and found the tombs, or like Champollion translated the Rosetta Stone and learned how to read hieroglyphics, figured it out. And they are beautiful, wonderful dramas. They're not documentaries. They're acted. And they're wonderful to watch. And one of the coolest things about them, we were watching it. I guess I am a kid. I don't know. I thought it was pretty great. One of the best things about it is the camera went right into like Deir el-Bahari, Hatshepsut's tomb, the first queen in history as far as we know. Hatshepsut was a queen of Egypt, and she has this massive tomb in the Valley of the Kings called Deir el-Bahari. And the camera walked with us as these 2 characters were talking right into the tomb and showed us the place. Magnificent.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, so there's all these great tools out there if you want to teach history, because almost any period of history, there's cool documentaries, there's film, there's so much stuff out there. If you stick to the timeline and you hit a part of history that your kids just light up on, that's their thing, they want to know more about it, that's easy. Get on the internet. You will find documentaries. Most of them are on YouTube for free about almost any period of history you can think of. And documentaries and film, that's a great educational tool if they're well done. I think with history, there's another viewpoint that I also want to espouse, and I'd like parents out there to at least consider. In a 12-year, 13-year education, however long your child is going to be educated at home, hopefully, what you should know is that if you're playing the long game, you're probably going to go through the entirety of history 3, maybe 4 times. You'll go back to the beginning, whatever you consider the beginning to be, whether you take the scientific view that the beginning is prehistoric man, or you take a fundamentalist Christian view that the beginning is 6,000 years ago, or whatever it is that you happen to work with. You're going to go back to the beginning and work your way all the way up to present time numerous times. During the 11, 12, 13 years, your child will be getting an education. With that in mind, when the child is young and you're first exposing that child to history, have a light touch. Don't try and get a bunch of information into his head. Make sure that he has fun with history. Make sure that it's interesting to him. Make sure that there's lots of pictures and hands-on thing. For instance, when you study ancient Mesopotamia or Sumeria, you're going to study cuneiform writing. So get some clay and get a wedge like a pencil or a screwdriver or something and let him create cuneiform letters. There are all kinds of sites on the internet that will show you what each cuneiform letter looked like and what it meant. So that's an experience that your child can have. When you study Egypt, the same thing goes with hieroglyphs. There are all kinds of sites that demonstrate hieroglyphs. So have your kid create his own cartouche as if he's a pharaoh, put his own name in a cartouche. There are all kinds of hands-on experiences available out there for almost every period of history if you get creative. I did that in my curriculum extensively. All kinds of creative hands-on stuff, every single lesson plan, especially when a child is younger so that they really have history come to life for them. But don't sweat the details when a child is young. Dates don't matter at that age. If they get a general idea of the flow of history and they understand that ancient Greece predates ancient Rome and that ancient Rome predates the Dark Ages and that the Dark Ages predate the Renaissance, etc., they'll know more than most high school kids do now by the time they're 7 or 8 or 9, if you've taught them that. And they don't need to know the dates. What's more, they don't necessarily need to know the names. Some of them are more important than others, of course, that's true. But the reality is that they're going to go over it again, and then they're going to go over it again when they get older.
If you do it right, they'll love to go back and do it because they're like, oh, I remember this. And then when they get to high school, then they're really absorbing, those names and those dates. They just naturally do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they already have the background. They understand the importance of it because they learned it when they were 8, and then they learned it again when they were 10. So by the time they're 14 or 15, covering it a fourth time, they understand the significance of it, and they're ready to embrace more details. That's a very key approach to education in general, is to understand that it's a long game. You're going to go over things numerous times, and that each time you go over it, the child will be older and more capable and more literate and more able to embrace the subject in its details. But that takes time. And to sweat the details and to expect a kid to spit them out in a test at the age of 7 or even of 8, 9, whatever, is a real waste of time, and it makes kids hate their studies.
Before we go on, let us take a minute to hear about our sponsors.
Ready to homeschool your children, but you have no idea where to start or how to do it? Already homeschooling, but you're running into problems, or maybe you just want to improve results. Are you an expert homeschooling parent looking for every possible angle for your children? The Homeschooler's Handbook, written by an award-winning teacher with over 40 years' experience at every level of education, has the tools and answers you're looking for. Use the link on the luminousmind.net podcast show notes page and buy your own copy of the Homeschooler's Handbook today.
Back to the Luminous Mind, where we are privileged to be mentored by award-winning author and curriculum developer Stephen Horwich.
I really recommend that long game philosophy. The first time through, the lightest possible touch, make it fun, lots of hands-on stuff, go through history in sequence. And if you hit a spot in history that they love, stop there, spend time there, put up your tent, and that's where you're gonna spend some time, and then move on when you've exhausted it for that age group and for their ability to be interested in it. Then move on. I think if we handle history that way, we're going to have students who are far more interested in history. I personally don't think there is any subject more important than history for a student to be good at and to want to learn. I think it's life and death as far as our civilization goes for our young to understand history, and I don't think they do. I don't think very many people understand history well at all. And that is not a good thing.
Would you recommend, too, when you're teaching history, kind of covering the religions of the world? I mean, I think that's kind of a natural, that's how you find.
Yeah, I absolutely do. In my curriculum at every level, it's broken into 4 age groups, my curriculum, four levels of literacy and ability. At every single age group covers all the major religions of the world. And we don't just talk about them. We cover them very extensively. We have them read, segments from the original religious writings of that particular religion. We have them go to a temple, go to a church, go to a mosque, go to a Buddhist temple, watch services for 2 hours, and then we give them a questionnaire to ask somebody who's practicing that religion to find out more about why they're practicing that religion and what it means to them.
Well, that might be hard to do in Idaho.
Well, it is. You know what? I got to tell you, it is kind of hard to do, but you'd be surprised at the resources that are available almost everywhere. Somewhere around you, there are Buddhists. Somewhere around,
there's got to be.
Yeah, there are. Every major religion is represented in every area of the United States. But yeah, you got to do some work, and I had to do some work, and I didn't get it all done, but I got a lot of it done with my kids. It's an adventure, but it's a very important part of history, and it's a very important part of a kid's studies. My concern is that public schools can't even discuss religion. They can't mention the word. If you say Jewish or Christian or Islamic or Buddhist or Hindu or anything, you use that word in a classroom, you're asking to be shot out of a cannon. And that's absolutely dire for the students. If you don't know about a thing, it's easy to be afraid of it. If you don't know about a thing and it's a mystery to you, it's easy to look at it as something, grim or dark, and it's easy to be misinformed about it and misled about what its intentions are. I think that's true in science. I think it's true in history. I think it's true of everything. In religion, there is no more important idea than you should understand all these religions. You should understand what the practitioners of those religions believe and why they believe it. You don't have to practice it. You don't have to accept it. You don't have to believe it. It doesn't have to have any part in your life except for you understand it, and when you encounter it in life, as you surely will, it is not a mystery to you. It is not frightening to you. You know how to confront it. You know what it is. I never, ever, ever ask a student to believe anything in history and science and religion, anything. I present these things to my students, and I leave it up to them to determine what it is they want to accept. But I do present them very thoroughly, and religion is absolutely critical to survival in this world. You must understand major religions.
It creates apathy. I mean, where you understand that person and can have some common ground with them. So
You bet. And I think that there was, at the college level, 25, 30, 40 years ago, there were classes in a thing they call problem solving, also in critical thinking, which is still a term that they use. But problem solving, the idea was try and find ways to solve problems without violence. Try and find ways to locate common ground. Well, education itself creates common ground. If you understand that other man's beliefs, you can also understand where they relate to your beliefs, and you can find some common ground. There will be something he believes that you also believe. It does not mean that you ever have to accept the entirety of his beliefs or almost any of his beliefs. But to understand them is to have common ground. To understand them allows you to talk and solve problems. And that's real problem solving, education. With history, I would advise, again, these two things. Play the long game and start out with a very light touch. Don't worry about details. They'll come. And then stay on the timeline. Teach it in sequence, then start again 3 years later, then start again 2 years later. Really stop when your student gets interested. So now I want to move on to science because we're running out of time. The same thing applies to science. Really, the same thing applies pretty much to all subjects. But with science, you're going to go through science if you start early enough. And I think a student should start science quite early. Certainly by age 6 or 7, you should be doing some kind of science studies.
Well, and once again, so naturally. I mean, my little guy, he has an interest in bugs lately. So
yeah, there you go.
Makes it an easy in for that.
Yeah, so. See, he's a biologist already.
Exactly.
Well, that's good because that makes your job as a teacher very, very easy. You know what he's interested in, and you provide him every opportunity you can. And with the understanding that he'll be interested in that for a while, and then he may stop being interested in it, and it'll be time to move on to the next. Great, fantastic, because whatever he learns, he will retain because it's done out of joy and love and interest. So he's going to retain what he learns. With science, I have a pet bug with the way science is taught, just as I have a pet bug about how almost everything is taught. But with science, I find that nobody ever actually defines science to children, and nobody defines at the beginning of a study the subject that they're about to study within science. If you're studying physics or biology or chemistry, whatever, the definitions aren't there, and it concerns me. When I sat down to write a science curriculum for older kids, I went back and I read 4 college textbooks in each of the sciences I was going to write a course. I read about 25 college-level textbooks over one summer so that I could get the science, at least how it's taught on the college level, get the science down. And here's what I found, that the definitions within a subject in the college textbooks contradicted themselves. And one book alarmingly defined physics as the study of molecular structure of things and how molecules interact and that kind of thing. That's not physics, that's chemistry. Yeah. So, right away that book, we're talking about a college-level textbook.
Wow.
It ill-defined the subject. It incorrectly defined the subject that they were teaching. So you run into this kind of stuff all the time. And I think there's a step that has to happen with science very early on and repeatedly. You have to be able to teach a child what is science. Science is observing the physical universe and learning from it how it works, how the different aspects of the physical universe operate, including, human bodies, which are a part of the physical universe if you're studying medicine or anatomy or some area of science along those lines. But we're observing the universe around us, and through the scientific method, we're breaking down the universe and trying to figure out how things work and coming up with laws and the rest of it. So you have to start by explaining to a child that's what science is. It relies on observation and it relies on measurements. And if a child doesn't know those two things, he's not going to understand why he's studying science. He won't even know what it is.
I think teaching the scientific method, that helps them in all their aspects of learning because you use that for anything, observation, asking questions, all of that stuff.
Yeah, theorizing, then testing it with an experiment, then just looking at the actual results instead of what you think is going to happen, so
writing down your findings.
Right, exactly right. With science, we have to start by explaining that that's what science is. It's observation and measurement, and then theorizing and experimentation. So I always teach children at just about any age, I found a way to do it, that first. Then you find out what areas of science they might be interested in, and you can proceed from there. The other thing about science is that it works kind of like history. If you start teaching science at age 5, 6, 7, whatever, like your child is interested in bugs already, that child's already started studying science. You can be pretty certain that by the time that child is 15, 16, 17, and you've wrapped up his education, he will have had time to study all the major areas of science 2, 3, maybe 4 times. If you're working in an organized manner. There aren't that many areas of science when you generalize it. There's about 6 areas of science that you kind of want to make sure you cover if the child is interested. I would never force a child to study science. Never. If they have no aptitude, no interest, You could teach them some of the basics and get off it. But I do think that in the world we live in this culture, which is so science-based, it's almost a little dangerous not to know anything about science.
Well, if you don't understand it, you'll just believe whatever's told you later on. So
yeah, that's right.
And like you said, the college book that.
Yeah, that's alarming that college students are getting the garbage that I read. Was very alarming. But yeah, I also think that, again, with science, you encounter it in everyday life. For instance, if there's an illness in the family, if you have a little bit of a science background, it's a lot easier to do your research and find out what that illness is and what can be done about it. And if you really don't understand anything about anatomy, if you really don't understand anything about the human body and how it functions, that's going to be very hard for you to do successfully. And people may pay for that ignorance in prolonged illnesses and other problems. I've seen it, and it's not a pretty sight. So I think ignorance is always its own reward. And in the area of science, it's kind of important to get some of it done. But you have time. And you shouldn't wait to start science till a kid is in junior high or high school. That's too late. You have kids who will be interested in geology. If you go out and you get a bunch of rock samples and you say, see this shiny black rock, that's obsidian, and that came out of a volcano, and you see this thing, it's metamorphic, and it was created by blah, 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 and here's sedimentary rock, and it was formed in a river, and then you go out and go to your local hills and mountain ranges and look at the exposed stone and say, what is that? Is it volcanic? Is it sedimentary? Is it metamorphic? What are we looking at here? I did that with my kids. They learned the difference. It wasn't very hard, but having the little pieces of rock in their hand, which I went out and bought at a educational store for pennies, made it very real for them, and they got interested in geology because of that. So,
well, I think science really, if a parent can pick up on the clues, they will study everything. I've taught long enough to see that. I have one child that's maybe doesn't have an aptitude for it, but he's still interested in how his body functions, how, all that stuff. He'll be outside observing different things in nature even. And, I think if parents are just wise to pick up on those clues, they're not going to have a problem getting their child interested regardless of their aptitude or interest.
I absolutely agree. I think kids are naturally curious and interested in the world around them, and the world around them is the study of science. So it's pretty much a natural if you allow the child to lead the way as far as interests go. You'll have a pretty good idea of what subjects to study. Some children love animals. Some children love animals in the sea. Great. You're going to study oceanography then. You're going to study animal life in the ocean. There's an endless variety of subjects to study in science.
Yeah, and I haven't had a kid yet who doesn't love to grow something, sort of plant.
Yeah, you bet. And then you're into biology, and you're into all of that. So I think with science, there are two things to bear in mind. Three things. One, you have to explain to a kid very early on and maybe repeatedly what science is so that you keep coming back to the scientific method and they understand that we're figuring out the universe by using it. Two, play the long game. Don't play a short game. I have to get all of chemistry in my kid's head by the time he's 8 years old. Well, good luck with that. Chemistry is a monster. It is a bear of a subject. So play the long game. Take your time. Go over subjects many times. You have years to do it. Three, science should be hands-on. They have this thing called a lab science in education. A lab science means the kid did a lot of experiments. It means he got his hands dirty and he blew up the lab. And, we look forward to that. I think that hands-on is just about the only way to effectively learn science. I think it's very important. One more note about science, too. When you get into physics and you get into astronomy, there is a tendency, a lot of books and educators have, of focusing on the mathematics of those subjects, and I really recommend against it. I think it's very important for a child to come to grips with concepts and ideas, big ideas. about those sciences before you worry about the minutia of mathematics. It's not that the math is unimportant. The math is important in those subjects, but there's no point in learning the math if you don't understand why the math is there, what it's trying to solve, what ideas it is being used in service of.
That's probably when those things that if it really piques the kids' interest, they'll naturally go to the math.
And that's what I found. You exactly got it right. That's what I found in the past, is that if you have a young Einstein on your hands, he's going to end up doing mathematics. He'll get there, but he's going to be more interested in the concepts, the ideas, and then the math serves that. Einstein said, if you're struggling with math, take some consolation in this. The math I have to do is far harder than anything you have to do. And, he hated math, and he said so. He hated the mathematics of physics. What he loved was the philosophy, the concepts, the ideas of physics. Einstein grew up wanting to ride on a beam of light. That's what he was interested in as a child, which led to E = mc squared and most of modern physics. So, it's better for a child to dream and get the big ideas and understand what that science is looking at and dreaming about and trying to solve than to harp on the minutia of the mathematics unless your child is a mathematical wizard. And if he wants the math and he can do the math, hooray. But I would not push the math of science on anybody. I would instead focus on the ideas of science. So that's it for science. And then there's math, real quick. So let's talk about that for just a few minutes. I hate math. I always have hated math. I'm good at it up to algebra, and then I'm terrible at it after starting with algebra. I absolutely am awful at mathematics. But I'm terrific at it up to that point, mostly from practical application, which is where I was going to go. Math is useful when it's useful, and it is not useful when it's not useful. I met a math teacher at the college level. He was teaching trigonometry. And the first thing he said to his class, which was just great, he said, I'm now going to spend a semester teaching you a subject that you will not use more than 2 or 3 times in your entire life, if that. So I thought, wow, he understands that unless these people are going into, engineering or whatever, they're going into something that requires trigonometry, that they don't really need trigonometry. And I think that was a very interesting viewpoint he had. I think it's true and honest. Math is very useful up to a point, and then it stops being as useful unless that's what you're going to use in your profession. So,
well, and I think it's interesting. We have so many people who know how to do algebraic equations, but they don't even know how to balance their checkbook.
Right. And I'm the opposite. I know how to balance my checkbook, but I couldn't do an algebraic equation if you stuck a gun to my head.
Yeah.
So I understand. I am good at the math that's useful to me, and I am not good and never was at the math that did not have a practical application in my life. I think that's true of all education, but it is particularly true of mathematics. So what does it mean? Well, most high school districts require a student to have 2 years of algebra, 1 to 2 years of algebra, to graduate. I think that is extremely unfortunate. There are children who are good enough at math and good enough at algebra that they can get through it without too many wounds, and they're okay and they understand it, and some very small percentage of those students will move on to higher mathematics. There are other students who do not love math and do not do well at algebra. I was one of them. And the first year, I was a straight A student in high school until I hit algebra. And then I did everything in my power to miss those classes. I was in the acting program, I was in choir, and I made sure I had rehearsals when I was supposed to be doing algebra. And so I missed three-fourths of the classes, and I got something like a D, and I was told that I had to pass algebra. This was, many, many years ago, of course. I had to pass algebra. I would not be graduated from high school, which was shocking because I was a straight A student. So I took it in summer school, And my little brother, is a math genius. He's a computer programmer, and he had had the same teacher that I now had in summer school, and I hated math, and she knew it. So I struggled like crazy, and I finished the summer school course, and I got a B. And the teacher very wisely sat me down and said, Steve, you're not like your brother Richard. He likes math. You obviously do not. Are you going to continue with math? I said, absolutely not. And she said, good. And that was it. It isn't for everybody. I do think basic math is a must. You have to be able to figure out percentages. If you're ever going to work with contracts, you have to be able to do your checkbook, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, percentages, fractions. These are basic things that people use all the time, and you really do need them. But I think that's where it ends. I think that's where it ends for a lot of people, and you should not enforce mathematics on your kids. So if they know that stuff by the time they're 11 or 12 and they're conversant with basic math, they can do it, they have the abilities, you can end off. You don't have to continue mathematics if you're homeschooling. You can leave it at that. Make sure they know enough of their math to pass the GED so they can get their high school diploma and all that garbage. But at the end of the day, what you're interested in is the child learning what he's going to use in life. And if he's not going to use algebra or trigonometry or calculus or whatever comes after that, then you should not enforce that on your child. It is not useful to him.
Well, and I think having a separate subject of math scares a lot of people off of something that they necessarily love to do. I know a lot of people that, I'd love to go into this, but I have to know math. Whereas if they just started studying that, I think then math would just naturally, like we talked about with the science, if it's
That's
something
right.
that they really love, that math skill will come in that area.
If you love an area, you want to be an engineer and that really thrills you, you will learn the math involved to be an engineer. If you want to be an astrophysicist, you'll learn the math that is involved because you'll demand it, because you'll need it in order to do the things you want to do, of course. If you're going to be a set designer in theater or in film, that means you have to know some engineering, you have to know some design. It's largely mathematics. If you're a musician, I'm a musician. I'm a concert pianist. If you're a musician, it's all math, folks. Music is all math. But it's the easiest kind of math. If you can count to 13, you can do it. So I just think you have to look at what you want to accomplish, and your kid will tell you what he's trying to do. And if math is a part of it, he'll reach for it. And if it's not a part of it, take him as far as he's interested. Make sure he gets the basics. But then don't force the rest of it down your child's throat. Let him study things that he loves and that he's going to use.
I totally agree. Sounds wonderful. Well, and like I said, I would rather have a child know how to be able to balance their checkbook. I mean, too many people come out and go right into a debt. Like you said, they don't understand percentages. They don't understand some of the basic math, although they can do an algebraic type problem.
Yeah, but where's the application?
Yeah, something's a mess in our society.
Yeah, absolutely. They used to have in high schools and junior highs, and I found a good textbook for it, courses for junior high and high school kids in economics. And part of those courses were how to shop for things, how to find the cheapest price for tires, how to balance your checkbook, all these kinds of things, how to tip, what is 10%, what is 20%. They were lovely, usable, workable books on math that taught you how to do things you're going to need to do. They stopped publishing them 40 or 50 years ago. I still have some of them here, and I recommend them to kids if they can find used copies for economics for high school, economics for junior high. That's real math. That's real world math, real life math.
Do you have a favorite curriculum? I mean, I know some homeschoolers really like Life of Fred. I think that's the name of it, where it's more story problems or...
As far as math goes, what I always used, and I don't want to shill for them or, present myself as being in their corner in any way. I used to use Saxon math. And the reason I used Saxon was they had a specific homeschool program. And I looked over the homeschool program and I figured out the best way to use it. It wasn't the way they suggested. I would use their books, but I found ways to make math go much better and faster for my students by testing them out. In other words, we would kind of know where a student was starting math, what they knew and what they didn't know. And we would start, say, with second grade math by giving them the test for the first 10 lesson plans. And if, without looking at those lesson plans, they could do 90% on that test, 100%, we give them the test on the next 10 lesson plans. And if they did well on that, we give them the test on the next one until we hit a test where they weren't doing as well, where they were only getting 50, 60, 70% of the material. And anytime they missed anything, we had them review it and then take the test again. But once we hit a test where they didn't do very well, I knew that it was in those 10 lesson plans where we needed to start that student. By testing out that way, I didn't make the student do 20, 30, 40 lesson plans that he already knew, which is incredibly boring for a student.
Very frustrating, too.
Yeah. Exactly right. Yeah, for the parents too, very frustrating. In doing it that way and testing out in a single day, they skipped 40 lessons or 50 lesson plans. They were halfway through the book, and they picked up where they actually needed to pick up in the areas in which they didn't have a lot of understanding. I also think there's a tendency in education to switch curriculums often, So with math, that's disastrous in a way because every curriculum lays out differently and covers different skills at different time. So your poor student, you switch curriculum, and your poor student's looking at stuff he already studied, and it's in the middle of stuff that he never studied because it's laid out differently, and that's a problem. One way around it is to test out, as I described. Just give them the test, let them review those 10 lesson plans for an hour, and then give them the test for the 10 lesson plans. And if he knows the materials and can answer the questions, just move on to the next 10 and the next test. I think you save your student a lot of heartache that way.
Yeah, a lot of frustration and tears.
Yeah, exactly right.
Well, fun. It's been fun talking to you again. Did we cover every subject that I think?
Yeah, I think so. Let's see. We did science, history, math, reading, spelling.
Yeah, writing.
Yeah, good enough for now. Sure.
Well, thank you so much again for coming on, talking to us. It's been fun again.
Yeah, as always. And we'll come up with another one.
Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. To learn more about Stephen Horwich, go to our show notes at theluminousmind.net. Be sure to become a subscriber to our free email list and consider joining our program by going to the scheduling tab to become a fire starter today. Help support the podcast by making all your Amazon purchases through the free Amazon widget on our website. Also, sign up to receive 2 free audiobooks from Audible at theluminousmind.net. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, Google+, and now Pinterest. Get our audio content by subscribing on YouTube, iTunes, and Stitcher. To help us grow, consider telling your friends about us. Leave us a review. Tell us how we can help you so together we can continue to light minds on fire and change the paradigm of education.